It's been just over 1 year since I chopped my 92 GQ into an extra cab ute, and I wanted to review that whole process, where it's at now, and take some of the questions that you guys might have. So before we get started with that, I wanted to play a bit of a montage of this car's past year. It's actually surprising how many trips I've actually done with it chopped. It feels like I only just chopped it yesterday, but yeah, it's been over a year now and I've done so many trips in it. So before we get too far into the questions that you guys have, I wrote down some things that I know that I would do differently next time, and some of the damage that's happened and issues I've faced. So the first thing being cab vents. If you look at the back of any factory ute, you'll see vents either side of the cab, and it's so that when you close the door, it closes nice and easily and there's no resistance. I even bought cab vents, but it just became one of those too hard basket things, and I never really worried about it because it wasn't imperative. At the time, I only had like 20 weekends to get this done because I work full time and I had a trip coming up with Tyler, and so it was just one of those things that got put on the back burner and I never really worried about it. Not a big issue, just a convenience thing, and it's something for you guys to think about if you were to ever do this. The next thing, again, it just bugs me, but it's not a huge issue. When I was measuring up for the rear window, I wanted the angle of the window to be the same angle as the cab, but the cab wasn't made yet, and so I just sort of winged it. What I should have done is taken a measurement to the top of the doors and then to the top corners of the cab, and then taken that angle and shrunk it for the size of the window. But I accidentally took it to the widest point of the door and then shrunk it, and so the angle of the window is slightly steeper than the angle of the car. Again, not a big issue, just aesthetic, and honestly you'd probably never notice if I didn't bring it up. The two other things that I thought of was, one, I wish I had lifted that fuel tank when I was building the tray. I should have just like custom mounted it up a bit higher, because there's heaps of room above that tank under the tray, and the tank hangs so low because it's a 150 litre tank, and the thing has just been obliterated now by rocks. And so yeah, I still might do it. Once I've got my hoist and I can take my tray on and off easily, I might just take the tray off, lift the tank up so it slots in from above, and that way it'll be protected from rocks and that. Another thing that I wish I'd done, and again, it's just for aesthetic, but if I was to do it again, I would probably have a tube rear corner so that the contour of the back of the cab is nice. If you watch my chop series, you know that we actually tapered in 50mm. The back of the cab's not perfectly straight. It goes straight to the top of the doors, and then from the top of the door to the roof, it tapers in by 50mm. And that's because every GQ chop that I looked at with a straight back just looked funny to my eye. And then I was looking at my GU cab and noticed that it kind of goes like that. That was kind of just a way for me to try and make it look a bit more factory. And honestly, I do like the dimensions of the cab. I just wish it had a curved edge at the back, which is something I'd probably do next time. The last thing being fitting a spare on the back. So I would never ever build a roll bar of a tray to be perfectly rounded with the cab, because if you did roll over or put the car up against anything, you want that cab guard to be exactly that, guarding the cab. And so I just made it so it did protrude further than the cab, but it didn't look out of place. And then when it came time to fit a 37 spare on there, I couldn't. And so for the first 8 months of this car's life as a ute, I actually only carried a 35-inch spare, and I had to deflate it, push it under the roll bar, and then pump it up a bit in order to get it to stay there. Whereas now, I've actually made a cutout in the bed of the tray so that the 37 can sit down in there. When I was on a Cumberland trip recently, I ended up slashing a sidewall of one of my razors, and I had to use the 35 spare. And so for the rest of that trip, I was on 135 and 337s, which, to be honest, is manageable. It's not a big deal, but if I could make a 37 spare work, I want to, so I did. But yeah, let's get to the fun stuff. So I put a question out on Instagram, and I had so many questions come in, and so I want to get to those. So I've kind of put these questions into categories, and then there is a few cool, unique ones that I'll answer at the end. Now, the first big theme is dual cab. Why didn't you chop this into a dual cab? Now, that is a really, really fair question. The root of the answer is I don't need a dual cab. If anything, I'm going everywhere alone, but if I do have someone with me, it's just one person, and that's pretty much Drew when we're doing the $1,000 track. And so, you know, if I needed more seats, then maybe it would be something that I would start to compromise on. I don't like the look of the rear wheel being under the rear door and then the entirety of the tray being behind that rear diff. It just looks out of place to me. It doesn't matter how short you make the tray, it just doesn't look right to me. And then aesthetics aside, I don't think it would handle well. I'm sure there's people out there with dual cab chops that would say differently, but I mean, all I can say is, with respect, you will not make a dual cab chop handle as well as something that's got the wheel in the center of the tray or back. That brings me on to the next sort of section of questions, which is cab space. Do you have enough cab space? The answer is yes. I store so much stuff in that cab, it's not even funny. In fact, I'll go through what's behind those seats. So behind my seat, I have fire extinguisher, my DC to DC, my air compressor, my subwoofer, and my 24-volt junction box. And then directly behind my seat on the floor, I keep a couple of awning walls. And then I usually put my clothes bag, my pillow, a jacket, or whatever. That all sits behind my seat. And then behind the center console is usually where I put all my camera gear, drones, cameras, batteries, phones, so that it can all charge there from that 24-volt hub. And then behind the passenger seat, I usually have my bag that's got my jump starter, jumper leads, tire repair kit, all that kind of thing. And then my recovery bag goes on top of that, which has got all my soft shackles, straps, that kind of thing. And then if I've got a passo, usually they'll chuck their clothes, pillow, everything behind there. But if I don't have a passo, then usually I put like a case of bottles of water behind there because I don't have water storage in the car. And so yeah, there's heaps of room back there, and I've never ever felt short of room. And it's funny because we never ever decided on an actual length of the car. All we did was, when we were chopping it, there's a rib on the floor that is just behind the front seats. You just ran the grinder straight up that rib, and it was a straight cut across the whole cab. And so that made it really simple. So yeah, if you've ever had your carpet up in a GQ, you know that rib that I'm talking about. Mine's cut just in front of that, and then once you get to the top of the doors, it tapers forwards 50 mil, and that's the dimensions that I chose. And so speaking about that cab, there is a question that asks, is it worth doing a custom rear wall, or would you just do a kit? Now, I did get a quote for a rear wall, and I've just looked it up now, and it was going to be $3,000 to my door. That does include the coil brace, tray mounts, etc. But I just couldn't justify spending $3,000 to get that down to my house, when I probably spent less than $1,000 on steel, a couple of $100 on tray mounts, and kind of make it myself. It wasn't really that hard in terms of it being custom. The difficult parts of the chop were actually, you know, welding the sheet metal and then sanding that away nicely, which you've got to do with a kit anyway. So if you're pretty comfy with metal, I would probably just go custom. But if you do live near a company that makes them, then go for it. I don't have a favorite way either way. It's just what I chose at the time. There's a lot of questions sort of aimed around the, do you regret it and would you do anything differently? So no, I don't regret it. This car had to keep going. I would never ever get rid of it. It took me to Cape York, Fraser Island, Glasshouse Mountains, Victorian High Country. Like, I was not getting rid of this car. I was also not willing to repair an entire cab. If it was just dents, then I would have just kept it as a match looking car. I love GQs with dents. I think they look awesome. But it was just the rust. The rust had to go. In GQ wagons, they have plastic trim in front of the rear wheel. and there was just so much rust sandwiched in between that plastic, and the rear corner of the roof started to get rust in it. I didn't know how much more rust was in the car, to be honest with you, and so automatically eliminating half the car to deal with and to get back on the road and rebuild was a good thing in my eyes, because I didn't want to have to fix, you know, a whole body's worth of car. And so do I regret it? No, it had to be done if I wanted to keep this car on the road. Would I do anything differently? I'd absolutely do the extra cab again. It's sort of the only option for me. But as I said before, I would probably do like a nice tube rear end so that it's got a nice contour on the back. But in terms of size of the cab, the taper of the back wall, all that kind of thing, I would absolutely do it again. But leading on from this category, there is a couple of questions about the paint, and that is probably the only other thing that I wish I'd done, and that is keep the two-tone. This is kind of a heavy spot in my heart because I loved that two-tone color, and if a clean wagon came up again of that color, I would probably buy it if the money was available, because that gold and maroon two-tone is my favorite two-tone out of all the GQs. And so at the time, I mentioned to you guys already that I only had 20 weekends to do this before the trip with Tyler, and so it had to get done rain, hail or shine. And I poured my absolute heart into welding this really well, sanding it back really well, and as soon as we put primer on it, you could see so many grinder marks, and I think gloss paint, you would have just seen all those marks immediately. And so do I regret going this kind of paint? No, it had to be done. But if I had more time or the ability to just pay someone to do the sanding, priming and painting, then that's what I'd do, because I would have loved to have kept that two-tone. But like, again, you got to think about what I do with this car. Like, most people think about pinstriping, like, you know, having leaves rubbing up against your cab and whatnot. But for example, going through the $1,000 track down here, you get to the point where anything smaller than like the size of your snorkel, you just let it donk over the cab, because you do not have time to deal with every little branch, because you're going to be on that track, you know, 8, 10, 13 hours as it is. And so while I wish it was still those two-tone colors, I think I would have absolutely annihilated that paint, and so it's probably a good thing that I have this kind of paint on there. But for example, with the GU, because I'm not doing any body work on that thing, it'll never get this kind of paint. I do want to paint that car, but it'll be like a high gloss paint. I still don't know what color yet, but yeah, that GU is definitely getting a paint job. And so the next question that's come up a few times is the cost of the chop. Now, this is only going to be really, really rough, but I'll try and work it out. The first steel I had to buy was a couple of meters of 100 by 50, a couple of meters of 50 by 50, and a couple of meters of 25 by 50. And so let's say that's about $150. And then you have the zinc sheet. So I had to use 2 sections of zinc sheet, and I think they're about $300 each. My tray mounts were $250. The rear window and seal and fitment was about $500, I believe. And then you've got grinding, sanding, welding equipment. That could be anywhere from $250 to $500. And then you've got the painting stuff. So if you don't have a gun, you've got to have a gun, air compressor, paint, plus the thinners and hardeners and you know, all that kind of stuff for painting. So if you total all that together, I haven't been keeping track while I've been talking, but it roughly equals this. And that is before you build a tray and, you know, engineer it and all that kind of thing. And that brings me on to the next category of questions, which is engineering. And so the main theme from these engineering questions is, was it difficult? What did the process involve? And how much did it cost? And so was it difficult? No, not really. The main thing I would suggest is involve them from the start. Get them over, get them to lay eyes on your car before you even put a grinder through it. Ask them how they want it done. Throughout the entire process of chopping it, I was talking to my engineer, I was sending him photos, I was asking him how he wanted things mounted, welded, cut, whatever, so that when it came time to actually sign it off, he had input in the whole lot and it was done how he wanted it. And so there was nothing really difficult about that. Every major step, I'd just take a photo of it, send it to him, ask questions, he'd let me know every step along the way. And so once it was done, the car had to be entirely roadworthy, meaning everything else had to be engineered at the same time. And so I don't know how much it would cost just for the chop itself, because when he was engineering the chop, he also had to engineer the other things that I'd changed. So I've got 2 mod plates on this car. The first mod plate is for the Falcon seats, the TD42 Ti engine because it's originally a petrol, the Falcon seats in the front using the Hurricane rails, the long range tank in the back, all of the superior suspension underneath, the seat reduction because it went from a 7-seater wagon to a 2-seater ute with the body chop modification, and lastly the GU diffs. Because this has GU diffs under it, I had to perform a brake test to make sure that it still performed as it should. And so yeah, the first mod plate was for all of that in one go. And then shortly after that, I did the long arms, shocks, and hydros, and I had to get a second mod plate for that because the long arms and the hydros involve doing things to the chassis. And so that was my second mod plate. I wouldn't want to quote a price because it could be different depending on what engineer you go to and what's involved with your particular situation. But I know that it was in the thousands type thing. So the next questions I think is really, really cool, and it's something I never really thought about, and that is the weight before and after the chop. Now, I wish I'd weighed the car as a wagon, but I am certain it would have been over GVM. I reckon it probably would have been about the 3-ton mark. And then during the engineering process, I had to get it weighed to make sure that I was within GVM. And when I put it on the scales, it was 2.6 ton. And that was a tank full of diesel and my 2 plastic tubs on the back with cooking gear in one and tools in the other. No fridge, no spare. And so that was really impressive because I wasn't actually expecting it to be that light. And so I feel like the car has to have gotten lighter because as a wagon, I'm certain it would have been heavier than that. But yeah, I wish I'd known the weight of it as a wagon because that would have been really cool to see if it actually got lighter. Now, the main big category of question is wagon versus ute. Which is better? I'm a bit torn on this, and I have preferences for both. So wagon is 100% better to live out of. I spent over a month on the road as a wagon. I had drawers in the back and a platform where the back seats used to be with my fridge and pantry, and that was absolutely awesome to live out of. And so yeah, I would absolutely prefer to live out of a wagon, and I even like the look of a wagon better. I think GQ wagons are probably the coolest looking 4-wheel drive there is. Now, where utes beat wagons is in the bush. Utes absolutely shine in the bush. You gotta remember, like, as soon as you get past the driver door, you can whack the arse end up against anything. Banks, trees, rocks, and I have. And they are so forgiving, nimble, and light in the bush. And so yeah, I think a ute will always outperform a wagon on the tracks, but I would 100% prefer the look of a wagon, and I 100% prefer living out of a wagon. And so do I miss my wagon? Yeah, absolutely. But something had to be done, and I'd rather have the car with me still than, you know, getting rid of it and finding another wagon. I would love a wagon to come up in the future if I was able to find a EFI TB wagon in a good color, nice and clean with no rust. I would absolutely buy it if money permitted, because I'd love to have a wagon again, and I'd love to try a petrol this time. And that brings me on to a question from 2F Shorty. If you did it again, would you stay with a diesel? Yeah, TD's just my engine. They have let me down many times because I've tried to get too much power out of them, but if you keep them sensible, they are probably one of the most bushproof engines there are. I actually have a video idea soon that I'm going to do that proves how bushproof they are. So stay tuned for that. Would you put an LS or Barra in it? I would put neither of those in any 4-wheel drive. However, if I was ever going to go to a petrol, it would be a TB42 turbo. Were there any red flags when buying it? Yeah, the dude who sold it to me, he's a massive red flag. Sentimental value aside, would you ever buy another wagon and chop it again knowing the ute version exists? The only car I would ever chop again is a 105 series Land Cruiser. I would love to own a 105 series in a short extra cab. I think they look so good, and I think they're probably the only car that I like the look of as much as or more than a GU. 105 series coil cabs are next level cool, and I would love to have one day. Tyler says, can you do a series on reversing the chop? I liked it better as a wagon. There is a couple of final questions that are just about the tray. Would you try and incorporate a rear winch into the design? And are you satisfied with the tray? Any changes you would make, please do a tray build on the GU. So yes, I'm absolutely going to build a tray for the GU and film a series on it. No, I wouldn't bother with a rear winch in a tray. I haven't really felt the need for one yet. When push really comes to shove, usually I've got to go forward anyway, or there's sort of another way that we can get out. And so yeah, it's never really been something I've considered. There is a couple of things I had to change on the tray, and a couple of things I will incorporate into my new tray. That is obviously fitting the 37-inch spare on this. I had to make like a cutout of the tray so that I could fit the 37-inch spare on this one. And I really want to incorporate more tube into the GU tray. I feel like I've got a good bender now and a better understanding of tube, and so I really want to try and make something really nice and aesthetic for the GU. I remember when I was chopping this and building the tray, there was lots of concern raised in the comments regarding the way I did the tray mounts. I understood where everyone was coming from, but I didn't think it would be an issue. Like, I've slapped this tray up against rocks, trees, ruts, banks, you name it. I've slapped this tray up against it and the thing's still going strong. I've had a look down those tray mounts and not one single one has moved. I probably still will do bracing for them on my GU tray, just because there's going to be more weight on that tray and it is going to be a bigger, heavier car, and so it is something that I would change on my next tray. But yeah, still hasn't been a problem on this one. And so that's pretty much it for chop questions. I do have a little collection of questions that are just about the suspension itself, and so I thought I may as well answer some of those. And so let's go through those rapid fire really quickly right now. A couple of people ask about coilovers and four links. The answer is no. I would never coil over or four link a car that is solid axle and coil from factory. It just works. It flexes, it's stable, it's good on the road, it's good on the beach. There's no reason for me to do it. The only time that I would consider a four link and coilovers is if I had a factory leaf vehicle like an LM106 Hilux, because coilovers are a lot easier to package. You don't have to try and mount a coil bucket top and bottom and then additionally have a shock mounted next to that. You can just mount the shock and the coil all in one package, and it just makes it a lot easier when you're trying to fit things in there that weren't there from factory. With all that you've tried and tested, what's your go-to with lift and tires? So I love big tires and low suspension. That's my go-to. So 35s or 37s with a 2-inch or 3-inch lift, and then really long shocks. Yeah, you don't have much up travel, so it's not very good for high speed stuff, but if you want stable, slow and flexy, that's the way to go in my eyes. There's another couple of questions asking just about the suspension in this car. And so all of this suspension, except for the hydros, long arms and shocks, was actually purchased by me long before I did YouTube or Instagram or any kind of social media. I paid probably 10 grand for the bulk of the kit, and the entire reason it's still in here is because it absolutely works and I've never had an issue with it. And yeah, I'll never ever change it because it suits this car's purpose perfectly. But yeah, so that is my sort of 1 year review on this Chop GQ. Thank you so much for sending me through these questions. It's been awesome to reflect on this. Stay tuned for next fortnight because we're going to convert the GU from the factory top mount intercooler to a brand new front mount intercooler, and we're going to fabricate up our own custom pipes. And then after that, I should be able to move into my new place and start building the tray. So yeah, if you did enjoy this video, please hit the like button, and if you want to see more on this car or the GU, please subscribe, and I really appreciate you guys sticking around to the end. I'll see you next time.